Have you ever been handed legal documents at a family celebration and told to sign them on the spot, in front of 60 people, with a smile on your face like it's the most natural thing in the world? No, you haven't, because that's not normal, but that was my reality. September 7th, 2024. My sister Claire's baby shower. A converted barn in the Cotswolds, fairy lights strung from the rafters, Prosecco flowing, and my mother standing across from me holding a deed transfer agreement with my name already typed into the signature line. And when I said no, when I looked her in the eye in front of every woman she'd ever tried to impress and said no, her hand connected with my cheek so hard the room went silent. But that's not the end of the story. Because 1 hour later, the woman my mother had spent 3 years telling everyone was losing her mind walked through that barn door with a solicitor at her side, and a folder full of documents that changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back. Because this story doesn't start at a baby shower. It starts with a phone call. A Tuesday evening in November 2021. I was sitting in my flat in Edinburgh, still in my scrubs after a 12-hour shift at the Royal Infirmary, eating reheated soup over the sink, when my grandmother's name lit up my phone screen. My name is Sophie Hartley. I'm a hospital doctor, a registrar in emergency medicine. I work long hours, I live alone, and for most of my adult life I have been the invisible daughter. Not the pretty one, not the charming one, not the one my mother liked to mention at dinner parties. That would be Claire. Claire Hartley, now Claire Pemberton, had been the golden child since birth. Effortlessly beautiful, socially magnetic, married at 28 to a hedge fund manager named Oliver whose family owned property in 3 counties. My mother, Patricia Hartley, had spent 30 years curating Claire's life like a personal exhibition. Every milestone documented, celebrated, amplified. Mine were noticed the way you notice background noise. Oh, Sophie qualified. Yes, she works at a hospital, you know how it is. I'd stopped expecting anything else by the time Grandma Dorothy called. Sophie, sweetheart. Her voice was steady, unhurried, the way it had always been. Dorothy Hartley had been a secondary school headmistress for 26 years before she retired. She did not flap. She did not exaggerate. I'm updating my will. I want to talk to you about Larkspur. Larkspur, the Lakehouse. If you've never been to the Lake District in late autumn, I can't fully describe it to you. The way the fells turn amber and rust, the way the water holds the sky like a mirror, the way the whole landscape feels ancient and unhurried. Larkspur Cottage sat on the eastern edge of Windermere, 3 bedrooms, a wood-burning stove, a jetty where Grandma Dorothy had taught me to fish when I was 7 years old. She'd bought it in 1987 for what was then a considerable sum. By 2021, the property market in the Lakes had made it worth something closer to £850,000. I'm leaving it to you, she said simply. I set down my soup spoon. Grandma, why? Because you're the only one who comes. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not sentimental. Every Easter for 15 years, Sophie, you bring good coffee and bad paperback novels and you never once look at your phone when I'm talking. Your mother sends a Christmas card with a printed signature. Claire sent a fruit basket last year with a note that had a typo. A pause. The solicitor's name is Andrew Kessler. He has my full instructions. Your mother won't be pleased. That, as it turned out, was the understatement of the year. Word reached my mother before the ink was dry on the paperwork. I still don't know how. The Hartley family network has always operated like its own intelligence service. Information travels fast and arrives pre-distorted. By January 2022, Patricia had convened what she called a family conversation at her farmhouse in Cheshire. I drove down on a Saturday morning not knowing what I was walking into. I found my mother, my father Graham, and Claire all arranged in the sitting room with the particular formation of people who have rehearsed. Sophie, my mother's smile was warm in the way that a gas hob is warm, useful, functional, and capable of burning you without warning. We need to talk about Grandma Dorothy's decision. Her decision is her decision, I said. She's 81. My father cleared his throat. He's a solicitor himself, semi-retired, and he has a habit of stating facts as though they're arguments. 81-year-old women can be influenced. She was a headmistress for 26 years, Dad. She's sharper than both of us. Claire looked up from her phone. She was pregnant by then, newly announced, glowing with the particular radiance of someone whose life is unfolding exactly according to plan. I'm not trying to be difficult, Soph, she said, but Oliver and I have been talking. We'd love somewhere for the baby to grow up going to. Larkspur would be perfect. It's practically sitting empty. It's not empty. Grandma uses it. She can barely drive anymore. Claire's voice was gentle, patient, the tone you use with someone who is being willfully dense. What's she really going to do with a lake house? And what are you going to do with it? You're at the hospital 6 days a week. I'm going to keep it, I said, because she wants me to have it. My mother set her teacup down with a precise click. The fair thing, she said, would be to either decline the inheritance or agree to sell and divide the proceeds 3 ways. Your grandmother would want this family to stay together. If you're so sure about what grandma wants, you could try asking her. The temperature in the room dropped. My mother looked at me the way she had my entire life, not with cruelty exactly, but with a specific practiced disappointment. As though I were a project that had failed to come good. Think very carefully, she said quietly, about what kind of daughter you want to be. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. The honest kind, I said, and I drove back to Edinburgh. The exclusions began that spring. I found out about Claire's gender reveal through Instagram, a pink balloon explosion in the farmhouse garden, family and friends around her, my cousins holding glasses of fizz. The caption said she's coming, with 17 heart emojis. I hadn't been invited. When I asked my mother about it, she said they'd assumed I'd be on shift. She hadn't asked. She'd assumed, and the assumption had been extremely convenient. I stopped being included in the family group chat around the same time. When I noticed and asked, I was told I'd been accidentally removed, and then added back to a different version of the chat that never seemed to receive anything important. I was 34 years old, working 70-hour weeks saving people's lives, and I was being managed out of my own family like a junior employee who'd raised an inconvenient grievance. The worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was the story that came with it. Patricia had begun to tell people, friends, family, the sprawling social network she'd built over decades of coffee mornings and charity committees, that I had manipulated Dorothy, that I had exploited an elderly woman's loneliness, that I visited so frequently not out of love but out of calculation. You know how Sophie is, I overheard her say at a cousin's birthday gathering. She's always been very deliberate. She said it the way you'd say cold-blooded. And the people listening nodded because Patricia Hartley had spent 30 years building credibility and I was just the background daughter. I didn't correct her. I didn't make scenes. I told myself the truth would be obvious to anyone who actually paid attention. I didn't yet understand that silence was something she was counting on. What I also didn't understand, not until much later, was why Grandma Dorothy had grown quieter over the past 2 years. Less forthcoming. Still sharp, still herself, but occasionally distant in a way that unsettled me. Once, sitting at the kitchen table at Larkspur watching rain sheet across the lake, I asked her directly whether anything was wrong between her and Mum. She was quiet for a long moment. Some things need more time before they're ready to be said. She finally answered, I didn't push, I should have. September 2024. The invitation to Claire's baby shower arrived in late July. Cream card, embossed lettering, a Cotswolds venue that I recognized as expensive. It had been 2.5 years of being treated like a stranger at the edges of my own family, and now I was being warmly invited to a celebration with 60 guests. I almost declined. I really did consider it. But some residual stubbornness, some refusal to be made to feel ashamed of something I hadn't done, made me RSVP yes. The night before the shower, my phone rang at 10:30. Grandma Dorothy. Sophie, her voice had that particular quality, controlled, deliberate, the headmistress voice beneath the grandmother voice. I need you to listen carefully. I'm listening. Your mother has been planning something for tomorrow. I don't know exactly what form it will take, but I know how she operates. She needs an audience. She's built one. A pause. I need you to have Andrew Kessler's number in your phone before you walk in tomorrow. She gave it to me. I wrote it down. Grandma, what's going to happen? I don't know precisely. But I've been preparing for 3 years, and if she does what I think she'll do, Andrew will have everything he needs. Her voice softened slightly. I love you, Sophie. You've never given me a reason not to. Remember that tomorrow. She hung up before I could ask anything more. I saved the number. I didn't sleep well. The venue was a restored barn near Burton-on-the-Water. Exposed stone walls, wooden beams, a florist's worth of white peonies and eucalyptus. The kind of space that existed to be photographed. Everything cream and sage and deliberately rustic in the way that costs a great deal of money. 60 guests. I knew many of them by sight. My mother's friends, Claire's friends, Oliver's mother and her circle, women whose names appeared on school governing bodies and local charity boards. Patricia Hartley's world, rendered in soft focus. Claire found me near the welcome table within 20 minutes of my arrival. She was magnificent in her maternity dress, a study in calculated radiance, and she hugged me with the same performing warmth she'd used at Madison's wedding, arms present, body absent. I'm so glad you came, she said. Then lower, Mum wants to do something special today, a family gesture. I hope you'll be open to it. What kind of gesture? Her smile didn't waver. She'll explain. Just be gracious, soft, please. The first hour passed in ordinary shower territory. Gifts were opened, games were played, there were tiny sandwiches and an enormous cake. I smiled at people who smiled at me and accepted compliments on my journey up and talked about the hospital to women who found medicine either fascinating or faintly alarming. Then my mother clinked her glass. Patricia Hartley stood near the window, afternoon light falling perfectly across her, as though the whole thing had been lit by a director. She was in her element, composed, radiant, commanding the room with the ease of someone who had been doing exactly this for 30 years. I'd like to take a moment, she said, to talk about family. What it means, what it costs, what it gives back. I felt the specific cold that starts at the base of your spine and works upward. Claire is about to become a mother, my mother continued, and Oliver and she will need a sanctuary. Somewhere to take their daughter as she grows. Somewhere that holds the family's history. She smiled. As many of you know, my mother Dorothy left a beautiful property in the Lake District, a Larkspur cottage on Windermere. It has been in our family for decades. She turned toward me. Sophie, darling, would you come up here? 60 faces turned. I stood, my legs felt detached, operating on instruction. I walked through the room to where my mother stood, already reaching into the bag at her feet. She produced a document folder. Opened it, deed of transfer, my name in the signature line, a notary seal already affixed. All you need to do is sign, she said pleasantly. And Larkspur becomes Claire's. A gift from sister to sister for the baby. There isn't a person in this room who wouldn't call that beautiful. There was a smattering of murmuring. Warm, approving, the sound of people watching what they believed was a lovely family moment. I looked at the document. Then I looked at my mother. No, I said. The murmuring died. Sophie, her voice dropped, an undertone now, a warning wrapped in grace. Don't do this here. You chose here, I said, not me. You chose to do this in front of 60 people because you thought I wouldn't say no. But I am saying no. Larkspur belongs to me. Grandma Dorothy left it to me. That hasn't changed. You're being incredibly selfish. She said it clearly for the room. Your sister is about to have a baby. What do you need a Lakehouse for? You're never even there. I'm there every Easter. I'm there at Christmas when you've told Claire I'm not coming. I've been there. You have manipulated that poor woman for years. Her voice rose. You have isolated her, made her feel guilty, turned her against her own family. She gave me a house because I visited her. That's it. That's the whole story. Sign the document, Sophie. No. And then her palm connected with my cheek. It wasn't a slap born of passion. It was controlled, deliberate, a last resort of someone who had run out of tools. The sound cut through the barn like a crack of wood. I felt my head turn, felt the sting bloom across my face. 60 women went completely silent. I stood still. I breathed. I looked at my mother, at the hand she had not yet lowered, at the expression on her face that I finally, clearly recognized for what it was. Not anger, not even contempt, but the panic of someone realizing they've gone too far. I picked up my bag from the floor. Right, I said quietly. We're done. I walked out of the barn, past the peonies, past the eucalyptus, through the double doors and into the cool September air. I found a low stone wall 20 meters from the entrance and sat on it. My cheek throbbed. My hands were shaking, but only slightly. I took out my phone and dialed Andrew Kessler. This is Sophie Hartley, I said. Please tell my grandmother the documents are needed. A beat. Understood, Miss Hartley. She's been expecting your call. She'll be there within the hour. I want to stop here for a moment. If you're watching this and you've been in a room where the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones causing the damage, I see you. This moment, sitting on that wall, face stinging, hands shaking, waiting, this was not a victory. This was the lowest point of the whole story. And the reason I'm telling you is because what came next was only possible because I didn't run. If you're in something similar, stay in your truth. That's all. I'll tell you what happened. She arrived in 53 minutes. I saw the car from the wall, a dark Volvo, Andrew Kessler driving, my grandmother in the passenger seat in her gray wool coat. Dorothy Hartley was 79 years old, moved with a stick now, had a hearing aid in her left ear that she regarded with mild contempt. But she stepped out of that car like she owned the Cotswolds. Show me, she said, touching my cheek gently. Her jaw tightened. She hit you. Yes, good, she straightened. Then there's nothing left to discuss. We walked back into the barn together. The shower was in pieces. Small groups of guests clustered, talking in low voices. Claire was seated near the window with Oliver's hand on her shoulder, expression shattered. My mother was near the bar with two of her closest friends, composure reassembled, working hard to manage the room. She saw Dorothy before anyone else did. The color left her face. Mum. The word came out broken. What are you? How did you? I drove, Patricia. Dorothy's voice carried across the barn. The room went still. Andrew drove, to be precise. I'm not supposed to on the motorway anymore, though I suspect that's the least surprising thing you'll hear today. She turned to face the room. 60 women, many of whom had known Dorothy Hartley for decades, settled into absolute silence. My name is Dorothy Hartley. I was a secondary school headmistress for 26 years. I am 79 years old, in good health and in full possession of my faculties, whatever my daughter may have suggested to the contrary. Her voice was measured, clear, the voice of someone who had spent a career commanding rooms. Larkspur Cottage on Windermere was left to my granddaughter Sophie in my will, dated March 2019. That will has been filed with my solicitor, Andrew Kessler, who is present today and is legally valid and enforceable. Andrew opened his briefcase and withdrew a document. Certified copy, notarized and filed with the appropriate probate office. I've represented Mrs. Hartley for 18 years. My mother stepped forward. Mother, this isn't the time. You've been under a great deal of stress. I've been under a great deal of awareness, Dorothy interrupted quietly, which is rather different. She nodded to Andrew, who withdrew a second set of documents. These are financial records relating to a savings portfolio held in my name. A portfolio that was liquidated in the spring of 2022 to the sum of £63,000. I did not authorize this liquidation. I did not receive these funds. The room silence became a different kind of silence. The account required two-factor authorization, my name and a secondary contact. Dorothy looked at her daughter steadily. Patricia was my secondary contact. I added her years ago in good faith when I thought I might need help managing my affairs. This is absurd. Patricia's voice shook, but she held her ground. You gave me access to that account, Mother. You told me to. I told you to help me check my statements when I was in hospital after my knee operation. Dorothy's voice didn't rise. I was in hospital for 10 days. The liquidation occurred over 4 months. I've spoken with the bank. I have correspondence. She looked at my mother for a long moment, and I've spoken with a financial crime solicitor. As has Andrew. Oliver's mother stood up from her chair near the window. Dorothy, she said carefully, are you saying? I'm saying that I have submitted a formal complaint to the Financial Conduct Authority and have been advised that the matter may be referred to the police, Dorothy said. I'm not here to prosecute my daughter in a barn. I'm here because she publicly humiliated my granddaughter, struck her across the face, and produced fraudulent documents designed to coerce her. She paused. And because I should have said something 3 years ago. Patricia made a sound I can't describe, not a word, something before words. Oliver stepped forward, putting himself between Claire and the room, his face the face of a man rapidly calculating consequences. Claire spoke from her chair, voice very small. Grandma, I didn't know about the money, I didn't know any of that. Dorothy looked at her, long, searching. I know you didn't, she finally said. You were told what you needed to believe and you believed it because it suited you. That's not the same as knowing. She held Claire's gaze, but it's not entirely innocent either. Claire looked down. My mother, I noticed, had stopped speaking. She stood very still, her 2 friends no longer quite beside her. A few inches had opened between them, the way space opens when people begin reconsidering. The house is Sophie's, Dorothy said to the room, not dramatically, not triumphantly. Simply as though reading a fact into the record, it was always Sophie's. It remains Sophie's. Anyone who was told otherwise was misinformed. She turned to me. Are you all right? I nodded. Good. She took my arm. Then I would quite like a cup of tea if any is available. It's been a long drive. We sat in a small anteroom off the main barn, Dorothy and I, with cups of tea that a visibly shaken young waitress brought without being asked. Andrew Kessler stood near the door quietly on his phone. How long have you known about the savings account? I asked. I noticed the discrepancy in autumn 2022, she said. Took me several months to understand it, then several more to be absolutely certain. She wrapped her hands around her mug. I kept hoping there was an explanation, that I'd made an error or misremembered. A pause. I hadn't. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have confronted her. She looked at me clearly, and I wasn't ready. I needed it to be undeniable. I needed it to be documented. And I needed, she said more quietly, to accept what it meant about my daughter. I understood that. She's been telling everyone I'm losing my mind, Dorothy added. I thought that was simply cruel. Then I realized it was strategic. If she could establish that I was confused, that my decisions couldn't be trusted, the will, the Lakehouse, everything, it would be much harder to act on any of it. She looked into her tea. It's actually quite sophisticated as a plan. I'd be impressed if it weren't quite so devastating. We sat in silence for a moment. What happens now? I asked. Andrew handles the financial complaint. The FCA will likely refer it to action fraud. Whether the police proceed depends on their assessment. She said it with the calm of someone reporting weather. I've been advised to expect a long process. And Mum, Dorothy was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she finally said. She's still my daughter. That doesn't stop being true. She looked at me. But love doesn't mean permitting harm. I've learned that rather late, I'm afraid. The fallout was quiet at first, then very loud. Oliver's family retained their own solicitor within a week, not in connection with the FCA complaint, but to ensure that Oliver's name was clearly separated from anything related to my mother's finances. A protective measure. I didn't blame them. My father, Malcolm, called me in October. He sounded the way people sound when they've been awake for several days. He said he hadn't known about the savings account. He said he hadn't asked the right questions. He said those two things with enough space between them that I understood he knew they were different statements. I told him what I told myself, that I wasn't ready to see him yet. That readiness wasn't something that could be rushed on his schedule. The women at the shower, many of whom my mother had spent years cultivating, began to drift. Not dramatically. Quietly. Phone calls that weren't returned as quickly. Invitations that didn't arrive. Patricia Hartley had built her social world on credibility and presentation, and the image of her hand connecting with her daughter's face in a barn in the Cotswolds, in front of 60 witnesses, was not something that could be managed away. Claire texted me in October, then again in November. I didn't respond immediately. When I finally replied, I kept it short. I'm not ready to talk yet. I need you to understand what happened before we try to rebuild anything. I'll let you know when I'm ready. She sent back one word, okay. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she was beginning to understand. I didn't know yet, and I'd learned to stop assuming. Let me tell you where I am now. It's February 2025. I have 5 days off for the first time since September, and I'm at Larkspur. The lake is iron gray today, the fells dusted with last week's snow, a low mist sitting on the water in the early morning. I made coffee in the kitchen where I taught myself to cook properly at 22, and I'm sitting at the table where my grandmother taught me chess, and I am very, very still. Dorothy comes in April. She's been twice since the shower, and both times she seemed lighter, less careful, less guarded. Like someone who has set down a weight they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it was there. I've been in therapy since October. My therapist works with NHS staff specifically, and she has a gift for saying things I've known for years in ways that finally land. We talk about the difference between loyalty and compliance. We talk about the specific exhaustion of being the child who was never quite bright enough or charming enough or useful enough until suddenly there was something worth taking. We talk about what it means to grieve a version of your family that never quite existed. That part is slow. Some weeks it's harder than others, but it's real work and real work matters. There's something else too. I've started teaching again, clinical skills workshops for medical students at the university. I'd stepped back from it a few years ago when the hospital got busier. I'd forgotten how much I loved it, being useful in ways that have nothing to do with what I own. A colleague introduced me to someone called James at a departmental dinner in January. He teaches structural engineering, has a dry sense of humor and a habit of listening in a way that feels like he's actually there, not just waiting for his turn to speak. It's early. It's very slow, but it feels like solid ground. Dorothy called me last week. She sounded well. The FCA have formally referred the matter, she said. Andrew says it may take another year to reach any conclusion. How do you feel about that? A pause. I feel like I did what was right, she said. The rest is for other people to determine now. She asked about Larkspur, whether the boiler was holding up, it's old and contrary, whether I'd found the spare fishing rods she'd left in the back cupboard. I told her I had, and that I'd been down to the jetty 2 mornings in a row. Good, she said. And I could hear something in her voice that I recognized from childhood, that particular warm satisfaction of things being as they should be. That jetty's happiest when someone's on it. She's right, it is. I want to say one last thing before I go. I spent a long time in this situation telling myself that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, reasonable enough, my family would eventually recognize the truth. That clarity would come on its own, that I didn't need to act, only to wait. What I understand now is that some truths need a witness. They need someone willing to say clearly and out loud, this is what happened and it was wrong. My grandmother gave me that. She walked into a barn in the Cotswolds and she said out loud in front of 60 people, this is my granddaughter and she is telling the truth. That's not a small thing. That's an enormous thing. If you have someone in your life who does that for you, who sees you clearly and says so, hold on to them. Tell them. They probably already know, but tell them anyway. And if you're still waiting for someone to do that for you, to be your witness, then start small. Do it for yourself. Say it out loud. I was treated badly and it wasn't my fault, and I am allowed to protect what is mine. You are. Thank you so much for watching. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that your boundaries are not selfishness and your truth is not cruelty, leave a comment. Tell me what it brought up. I read everything. Like and subscribe if you want more, and take good care of yourselves. I'll see you next time.